It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others.
For exactly 3 decades, the British public has been spoon-fed the exact same lie about how Queen Camilla actually got her crown. The story was so clean, wasn't it? The understanding ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, stepping aside gracefully. The man who quietly walked away from his marriage, supposedly taking a massive multi-million-pound secret payoff from Charles, so the royal love story could finally happen. But late last Tuesday night, inside a highly exclusive private gentlemen's club in Mayfair, with absolutely zero royal protection officers at the door, a meeting took place that just completely shattered that 30-year illusion. On one side of the table sat Andrew Parker Bowles, now 86 years old. On the other side sat Prince William. And what Andrew pulled out of a battered leather briefcase and slid across that table wasn't a memoir. It wasn't a plea for money. It was a faded yellowing legal dossier from 1995. And the documents inside proved something so dark the palace has spent millions trying to keep it buried. Andrew Parker Bowles was never bought off. He was blackmailed, extorted by the very institution he swore to protect. And after 30 years of swallowing the humiliation, he just handed the exact receipts, the signatures, and the names directly to the Prince of Wales. If you're new to my channel, hit subscribe right now, because the mainstream media is absolutely terrified to touch the legal side of this story, and we are breaking down the actual documents. Let's get straight into this, because to understand the weapon William is holding right now, you have to understand the brutal reality of what was actually done to Andrew in 1995. We have to go back to a closed-door legal office in London. The divorce papers are on the table. The rumors at the time said Charles emptied his Duchy of Cornwall accounts to buy Andrew's silence, a golden handshake. But when you look at the forensic land registry records and the bank transfers from that exact spring, the truth is staggering. Andrew Parker Bowles did not receive a single penny from the royal family. Not one. He actually lost money. He had to sell Middlewick House, his family estate, just to cover the debts accumulated during the chaos of the marriage breakdown. So why would a proud military man, a commanding officer in the Blues and Royals, a man who literally served as silver stick in waiting for Queen Elizabeth II, why would he just walk away with nothing, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and let the press brand him a coward? Because the Grey Men, the senior palace fixers operating on behalf of Charles and Camilla, didn't offer him a carrot. They hit him with a hammer. The documents inside that leather briefcase revealed the architecture of a textbook, institutional neutralization. The courtiers didn't threaten Andrew with physical harm. They went straight for the two things he valued more than his own life: his military honor and his children. The file contains the specific leverage they used. It was an ultimatum. If Andrew contested the divorce, if he demanded a public trial that would legally expose the exact timeline of Charles and Camilla's affair, the palace would launch a coordinated strike on his family. First, they threatened to freeze his children, Tom and Laura, out of British high society entirely. No royal connections, no elite university backing, total social excommunication. But the second threat was the one that broke him. The Grey Men had pulled a classified military file. They threatened to leak administrative errors from Andrew's military past to the Sunday tabloids, framing him for logistical failures that would completely destroy the reputation of his regiment. They were willing to drag the names of his fellow soldiers through the mud just to protect Charles's public image. They found his breaking point. A military man will always fall on his sword to protect his unit. So Andrew signed the papers. He accepted the role of the villain. He walked through London for 30 years, with his head down, taking the blame, surviving on a modest military pension, while the woman who broke his family moved into Clarence's house and eventually put a crown on her head. He kept the silence. He honored the brutal deal until last week, because the deal was broken, not by Andrew, by Camilla. You see, Andrew Parker Bowles didn't bring that briefcase to Mayfair for revenge. He brought it for survival. Sources close to the situation revealed that Camilla, feeling emboldened by King Charles's declining health, has quietly started overreaching. She has allegedly been attempting to set up an irrevocable multi-million-pound royal trust fund, redirecting crown assets specifically toward her own grandchildren. And to make sure nobody stops her, her team allegedly tried to put fresh legal pressure on Andrew, reminding him of his 1995 gag order, so he wouldn't dare speak to the press about her past financial maneuvers. But Camilla miscalculated massively. She forgot that a man who is 86 years old has absolutely nothing left to lose. So Andrew didn't go to the press. He went to the one man inside the royal family who has spent his entire adult life waiting for the exact right moment to tear Camilla's power structure to the ground. When Prince William opened that briefcase in Mayfair and saw the 1995 blackmail documents complete with palace signatures and courtier memos, he didn't look at it with shock. According to insiders, he looked at it with the cold, absolute focus of a man who had just been handed the nuclear launch codes. William finally has the undeniable, on-paper proof of the extortion used to build Camilla's throne, and what he did with that file the very next morning is going to change the British monarchy forever. The morning after that meeting in Mayfair, Prince William did not call a press conference. He did not leak a single whisper to the royal correspondence. He did exactly what he has spent his entire life learning to do. He waited, he watched, and he let the target walk directly into a trap she had built with her own hands. Understand why William struck when he did. You have to look at what was happening behind the heavy oak doors of Buckingham Palace over the last 3 months. While the public focus has been entirely consumed by King Charles's ongoing medical treatments, Queen Camilla has been quietly executing a massive financial consolidation. Sensing that her window of absolute influence is tied directly to her husband's declining health, she began moving with an urgency that terrified senior household staff. Through a series of highly discreet legal maneuvers, Camilla was allegedly attempting to establish what financial lawyers call an irrevocable sovereign generation trust. It is a very specific, incredibly secure financial vehicle designed to move liquid assets out of the Crown's general discretionary funds and lock them into a private trust. And the sole beneficiaries of this specific trust were not members of the Windsor bloodline. They were Tom Parker Bowles's children, Camilla's own grandchildren. She was attempting to siphon generational wealth generated by the monarchy to secure her private family's aristocratic standing for the next century. But setting up a trust of that magnitude requires bypassing standard parliamentary oversight, which meant she needed to rely on a network of private fixers and historical financial precedents. She needed absolute silence from anyone who knew how she had moved money in the past. And that is exactly why her team made the fatal mistake of contacting Andrew Parker Bowles. They wanted to remind him of the 1995 non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to ensure he wouldn't speak to any forensic accountants about the historical financial routing that Camilla used during the early days of her transition into the royal family. They thought they were applying routine administrative pressure to a defeated old man. They had no idea they had just handed him the justification he needed to finally hand over the extortion files to the Prince of Wales. Touching the financial inheritance that rightfully belongs to the Windsor bloodline, to George, Charlotte, and Louis was the absolute final line. William had tolerated the PR games. He had tolerated the planted stories. But the moment Camilla attempted to legally extract institutional wealth to fund the Parker Bowles dynasty, William shifted from a passive observer into an active executioner. The reckoning did not take place in a boardroom or a courtroom. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon inside the private reading room at Windsor Castle. It is a small wood-paneled room, usually reserved for quiet family correspondence. There were no secretaries present, no equerries standing guard. Only 3 people were allowed inside: Prince William, Queen Camilla, and King Charles. When William walked into the room, he was not carrying a tablet or a prepared statement from his communications team. He was carrying the faded yellow folder that Andrew Parker Bowles had given him. He sat down opposite his stepmother. Charles sat in a high-backed armchair in the corner of the room, looking physically frail and deeply exhausted. William did not raise his voice. He didn't offer any polite pleasantries. He placed the 1995 extortion file flat on the mahogany table and slid it across the polished wood until it stopped inches from Camilla's hands. He waited in total silence as she opened the cover. Inside were the original memorandums from the Gray Men, the drafted threats against her own children's social standing, the military blackmail schemes used to break her first husband, and, most importantly, the signatures of the palace officials who had executed the extortion acting directly on her and Charles's behalf. The blood completely drained from Camilla's face. She recognized the documents immediately. For 30 years, she had believed these papers were destroyed in the palace incinerators. Seeing them sitting on a table at Windsor Castle in the hands of the future king was the equivalent of watching the ground completely fall away beneath her feet. William looked at her with eyes that sources describe as absolutely empty of any warmth or hesitation. He delivered his ultimatum with surgical precision. He told her that she had exactly 2 choices, and she would make her decision before leaving the room. Choice 1. She would immediately instruct her solicitors to dissolve the irrevocable trust. Furthermore, she would sign a pre-drafted document voluntarily stepping down as the active president of 15 major royal charities, permanently surrendering her access to their discretionary spending accounts. She would retain her title on paper, but she would surrender all operational and financial power effective by midnight. Choice 2 was considerably darker. If she refused to sign, William would personally hand the 1995 extortion dossier to the Director of Public Prosecutions at Scotland Yard at 8 o'clock the following morning. He made it explicitly clear that the charges would not be treated as a family matter. The file contained documented proof of criminal extortion blackmail and the malicious abuse of state intelligence for personal gain. A public criminal inquiry would completely destroy her reputation, force a constitutional crisis, and likely end with her being stripped of her title by an act of Parliament. Camilla's hands began to shake. She closed the folder and turned desperately toward the corner of the room. She looked at King Charles. This was the man who had torn the British monarchy apart to have her, the man who had fought his mother, his sons, and the British public for decades just to put a crown on her head. She expected him to intervene. She expected the sovereign to use his absolute authority to order William to destroy the file and stand down. Charles looked at the yellowing papers on the table. He looked at his eldest son sitting perfectly still, radiating the kind of absolute resolve that Charles himself had never possessed. And then the King of England closed his eyes, turned his head toward the rain beating against the window, and said absolutely nothing. The silence in that room was deafening. It was the sound of an empire collapsing inward. In that single terrible moment, Camilla understood exactly what was happening. Charles knew that if this file went public, the scandal wouldn't just take her down, it would destroy his reign completely. Given the impossible choice between saving the woman he loved and saving the institution of the crown, Charles did what Windsor men have been trained to do for centuries. He chose the crown. He abandoned her to survive. Without a word of defense from her husband, the reality of her situation crushed her. She was completely trapped out, maneuvered by a man who had spent his entire life studying the exact mechanisms of palace power. Camilla picked up the gold fountain pen sitting on the desk. Her hand was trembling so violently she could barely grip the metal. She signed the dissolution orders. She signed the charity resignations. She signed away every piece of tangible influence she had spent 2 decades meticulously accumulating. When she walked out of that reading room, she was still technically the queen consort. She will still wear the jewels, she will still smile for the cameras at state banquets, and she will still wave from the balcony. But it is all an illusion now. She is existing inside a highly monitored glass cage. Every pound she spends, every engagement she attends, every charitable initiative she attaches her name to must now be routed through William's private office for approval. She has been reduced to a ceremonial ghost in her own home, and the truly poetic part of this entire operation, the detail that makes it a masterpiece of institutional revenge, is the symmetry of how it was executed. William did not just protect his children's inheritance. He did not just secure the financial integrity of the monarchy. He avenged his mother with a level of cold calculation that would have terrified the men who once tried to erase her. Diana spent the last years of her life begging the world to see the cruelty of the palace machinery. She was crushed by the gray men, silenced by the establishment, and replaced by a woman who thought she had won the ultimate prize. 30 years later, Diana's son used that exact same machinery, and the very husband Camilla discarded to completely dismantle her. William used the architecture of Camilla's own sins to lock her in a prison of her own making. As the door clicked shut behind Camilla, Prince William remained in the reading room. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply picked up the 1995 dossier, placed it back into the battered leather briefcase, and locked it. He is not destroying the documents. He is keeping them in his private safe at Adelaide Cottage, a permanent loaded weapon resting quietly in the dark. The message sent to the entire royal household that afternoon was unmistakable and absolute. The transition of power has already happened. King Charles may wear the crown, but Prince William now controls the institution. And for anyone who ever thought they could manipulate the Windsor family, exploit its wealth, or disrespect the legacy of the people who suffered to build it, the era of polite apologies is officially over.